Okay. All right. So there was that. Now, good, excellent. And so yeah,
Great.
I think you did a really good job of expressing it. Okay, so now from here, what are some other areas of audio description that really stand out to
So
you? Yeah,
what stands well, so that's I'm just demonstrating the power of audio description, and I hope you
absolutely.
got it. So the other part is structure. So I described the mountain for you. I could describe an airplane for you. I could describe anything that I've had the privilege of having some knowledgeable person talking to me about. And I got very interested in, now I mentioned this woman, Shakila Maharaj. Now, Shakila had started an audio description company in South Africa, and um, which is the only audio description company in South Africa. And it specialized mostly in movies. Now, you'll appreciate that most audio description, most of us are familiar with the audio description provided by the networks. Now, in America, you're much more, and the rest of the world, many of your channels provide audio description. But in South Africa, our actual television network does not. And the only exposure to audio description that we have is either we pirate it, we take it off things like Three Blind Mice or Audio Vault, and it's you could argue about the copyright of it, and or Netflix, because we have Netflix in South Africa, but we don't have Amazon Prime unless well, you have to pay for Netflix, but I don't know a single person here who does. We don't have we do have Apple TV, it's true, but I don't actually know many people who watch it. We don't have HBO at all. So we don't get exposed to a great deal of audio description, only Netflix. And now, obviously, many of us love the productions. I'm always fascinated by what isn't audio described. The Good Doctor, for instance, which is a show that a lot of people know, and it's a very important show because it highlights autism, isn't audio described. Not that I can find. Not in South Africa. It might be in America, but it's not. And that begs a question, which is an appalling indictment, frankly. Anyway, so there's the whole movie thing. And Shakila has ensured that audio description is on the map because she has approached the film commissions, and her company provide audio description for local made movies. And okay, yeah, okay, fine. Sorry about the correction. My point is, I've never encountered it. Is the point I'm making? I'm not suggesting that it doesn't exist.
Love
But
that from the peanut gallery, from the audience, backseat driving, they're correcting the
yeah,
game.
yeah, it's a backseat there. It's a peanut gallery.
Oh boy, that was cute.
Interjecting
That's
there.
amazing. That was good. That's good. That's
Anyway,
material. Yeah.
so I worked with Shakila, and so one of the beauties of one of the geniuses of Shakila's company is that they do blind verification. And I cannot, what's the word, overemphasize the importance of blind verification in audio description. Now, I have a bit of experience in verification because 35 years ago, I volunteered as a verifier for audiobook reading. Um, and not, yes, audiobook reading. So the Blind Library had a free audiobook service. And it's not like audiobooks as in audiobooks we know today, where some of our favorite actors narrate books. This is volunteers reading books. Okay, so it's called Library for the Blind. And for a long time, they had no, not blind, they had verifiers, they had monitors who listened to the recording as live while it was happening. And you could stop a recorder, you could stop a narrator. And I called them up and I bullied my way into being, and I was the only blind narrator. Oh, not narrator, blind verifier or blind monitor in Tape Aids for the Blind. Sorry, it was Tape Aids for the Blind. It wasn't the other one, which was another company. Anyway, and it was fascinating. I did it for a couple of years. So I listened very carefully. And because I'm well read, um, I was able to correct people on pronunciation um, and they probably hated me, but I didn't care because, as far as I'm concerned, if an audio book is badly read, it's not worth the airtime. And so I had experience already. So one of the things that Shakila's company is known for is blind verification, where a blind person listens to the script and before it's even narrated, so that we can say, actually, you know what, you haven't covered the detail enough. We might not know what the movie's exactly looking like, but the detail is important. What are you missing? And this is something I want to talk about quickly, is the quality of audio description, which varies. I'm sure any blind person listening to this will verify that there are good audio description and there are bad audio description copies or recordings. And I've seen some appalling audio, or heard some appalling audio description lately on Netflix. Now, I'm not sure if I can blame Netflix for this, but apparently I can, because Netflix commission audio description themselves. And quite frankly, I think sometimes they get quite lazy, or they use audio description companies who don't do a particularly good job. Now, if you don't have a blind verifier, the sighted guy is unlikely to pick up some of the objections that I'm going to pick up. And it's become, I'm sure I'm not alone in the listeners here. There's a lot of chatter out there about the quality of audio description. You know, should you have a woman narrating a woman scene? Should you have a black guy narrating a black character? That sort of thing. So there's a great deal of complexity in the game. Anyway, so that's what Shakila does. But then I got involved with her to do a bit of verification. But I'm fascinated by statuary. I love sculpture, and so I said, let me describe some sculptures. And so she was keen for me to do that, and so I did. And so I described, and I'd like, if you're open to it, I'd like to describe a sculpture and see if you get it. So in Cape Town, we have a suburb also on the seafront called Sea Point. And on that, it's a long promenade, probably 3 miles long, and maybe not like, maybe 2 miles long. And there's a grass verge, so it's right on the seaside. It's a rocky coast. And in that grass promenade, there are many, many exciting things. There's a children's train where they can sit on this train that goes around a big track. There are gyms, you know, the outdoor gym equipment, which is lovely. And then there are very interesting sculptures. And so I was going to do one for you, but I've changed my mind and I'm going to do one which I haven't done before, but I've just seen it. So I'm going to do this is live, man. So I'm going to do this al fresco because I haven't even written the script yet, but I reckon I could do it. So it is extraordinary. So if you were to look at it from the side, you would see nothing. You would see 7 or 8 pieces of arbitrary metalwork in very strange sizes and designs. If you look at any one of the 8, and they're all about 5, 6, 7 yards, yards apart, meters apart. A yard and a meter are similar. So they're about 6 or 7 meters, 20 foot, about 20 foot apart, each one of them. And there are 7 or 8 of them, I forget which. And they're obscure on their own. If you look at any one of them or even feel any one of them, they would mean nothing, absolutely nothing. However, the most extreme item on the right looks like and feels like a rifle sight. So it's a stand. You have to stand up on a platform, and then you hold your hands like a periscope of a submarine on either side, and you look through what is clearly looks like the crosshairs of a rifle sight, if you can picture that. If you can't picture it, cross your fingers in front of you like a cross, and imagine you were looking through the center of the intersection of the cross. That's what's called a crosshair in a sight. And when you look through that crosshair, you see, if you can see, you see a sculpture of a rhinoceros. But it's made up of 8 different parts. So when looked at from the side, it means nothing, but only makes sense when you look at it through the crosshairs of that rifle. And it's got a very clever name. It's called rhinosaur, as in dinosaur. So what it's really, it's a commentary on potential extinction, because the rhino is an endangered animal, very, very much endangered of extinction. There's a very good chance that your children, if you have young children, when they're adults, there's a good chance that there won't be a rhino in the world. So, because they are targets for poachers. and the poachers take the horn and they send the horn to the east to grind them up for aphrodisiacs. That's the only reason. It's its only value. And so they die like flies. So you can see the sculpture only through the crosshairs of that sight. So I don't know what it's called. I'm sure in the artistic world they've got a term for a conglomeration of things which make up an image when you see it in a certain angle. And that is the one that I wanted to talk to you about. So what did you think? Did you get it, Aaron?
Absolutely, yes. Very clear description. Very, very beautiful description. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, there we go. Well, that was al fresco, I might tell you. Meaning I did it I did it on the fly.
Oh, okay.
So so that leads me to the tactile experience, which I want to talk, because I think it has a strong.
Absolutely.
So here's the thing. So recently I saw a statue, a sculpture, which moved me a great deal. Um, it's associated with the Anglo-Boer War, which I spoke about in our previous episode. And the Anglo-Boer War has moved me greatly, particularly because I am a feminist. I'm a history fan, but I'm also a diversity practitioner. That is my trade. So I specialize in diversity, equity, and inclusion. But obviously, I have a disability bent or a disability angle on it. And I'm also very interested in gender equity and gender empowerment, women's empowerment, obviously. Now, women have had it rough over the generations. You know, it's ridiculous that we only got the vote, you know, in the 20s. It's ridiculous that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had to knock on hundreds of law firms in 3 states and not get a job. You know, that's so. I'm very interested in women's rights, and there's a statue. It's the Women's Memorial Statue commemorating the tragedy of the women who died um, in the concentration camps during the Boer War. So let me describe to you. Now, here's the thing. And this is where tactile is so useful. I was allowed into the vault of the museum because I wanted to feel the guns. I wanted to feel the rifles, the swords, the bayonets, the pistols. I wanted to feel the armory that was, you know, the ammunition that was used during the war. And of course, that's not for the average person to feel in a museum, obviously. So they let me into the vault and I was allowed to feel those things. And while I was there, I touched something and I said, well, what's this? And they said, it's a maquette. Now, if you know anything about art or sculpture, which I don't know a great deal about, but a maquette is a miniature sculpture of what eventually will become the master sculpture. So, Eiffel and the other chaps that were involved in the creation of the Statue of Liberty would have created a maquette, a small statue that would literally have been only probably a foot high, which gave people an idea of what the big thing would look like eventually. So that's called a maquette. And so they said, oh, it's a maquette of this women's memorial sculpture. And the sculptor is a famous South African Dutch sculptor in those days called Anton van Vo. And he did the sculpture in 1913, or rather he finished it in 1913. I assume it took a long time. And here it is. Let me tell you about it. So I was shown it, and somebody described the sculpture to me, and quite frankly, not very well. Because one reason is it's 30 feet up on a pedestal. It's very big too. It's way bigger than life size. And it depicts 2 women and a child. But because I could feel the maquette, because the maquette was small, the maquette was quite literally only about 10 inches high, I was able to, which is about 200 millimeters, by the way, I was able to feel everything. And it's in gross detail, incredible detail, the maquette. I could literally feel way more about the way the women were standing, or the one standing, the one sitting. I could feel way more about the child than the audio describer told me. Now, so here it is. So picture this. Now, what's very special, it's got a very interesting history, the statue. So during the Boer War, there was a fascinating woman called Emily Hobhouse. And she was a British woman who came out and threw a fit when she saw how badly the women were being treated in those concentration camps. And she lobbied the British Parliament to change the conditions, and she had great success. And the Boer women, to this day, revere her. There's even a submarine named after her. And so she's an absolute iconic heroine in South Africa, in white South African culture, if you like. So here's the thing. She was on a station, which was where the women had to congregate to the station in order to get onto a train to take them to a concentration camp. And on the platform of the station, she encountered two women holding a child. And she was very moved, and she wrote in her diary. So this is why I'm able to describe it, because I've read what she wrote. But let me tell you what she saw. She then told Anton van Vaux about it. He had a different sculptor in mind entirely. And when he heard her story and read what she wrote, he changed his mind and he produced this sculpture. So picture this. There's a woman sitting on a bench. Now, the Dutch in those days wore what was called a kappie, which was a bonnet, very much like the frontier women would have worn a bonnet, very similar thing. In fact, identical, to tell you the truth. So they would have worn a bonnet. Now, the bonnet isn't important in this picture, but this gives you an idea. The dress, the women's dress, would be long, very long, right down to the ground, long sleeves, very conservative. These were frontier women, if you like. I mean, very conservative. Now, the woman is sitting on a bench, and she's holding a child. The child's not tiny. The child is clearly a little more than a toddler. I would suspect the child is probably 3 or 4. The child is utterly limp in her hands, in her arms. And we can see that because the left arm of the child, the girl, is dangling down, and the legs are limp. So picture that tragic scene of this woman holding this utterly limp child. The child is obviously dead or dying, and the head is clutched to the woman's breast. But what's haunting about this is that the woman isn't looking at the child. She's looking dead ahead. She's looking straight ahead in an almost catatonic stare. And Emily Hobhouse said that she wasn't even crying. But the woman behind her, who is clearly her friend, has her hand on the right shoulder of the woman and isn't looking down at the child or even her friend, but she's looking at right angles. And remember, she's standing slightly behind her, so she's looking into the distance at right angles, almost looking into the mountains, if you like. And there's such a desperate feeling about the way this woman is staring, as if to say, what more? What more do you want from me, God? And that is the Women's Memorial.
Yes.
Now, I would never have got such a visceral connection with the statue had I not been able to feel the maquette.
Right. Yeah, it's a really beautiful description for sure. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Excellent. We have I can give you another 8, just to let you know, another 15 to 18 minutes, just to let you know.
I saw that.
Yeah. But
So-
yeah, you're definitely painting a very deep picture of the importance of audio description, you know. It's something else too that intrigued me, and I didn't quite understand what it was. So let's go back to it a little. You said that you also have volunteered and worked as a audio description verifier. So I guess it's obvious to us blind people, but if there's a sighted person tuning in and listening, they wouldn't fully grasp this. So what do us blind people look for when we hear a good audio description? I think that's a very subtle and a very important concept.
It is subtle. So you may have seen a very, very, very good rendition of an excellent book. It quite came out earlier this year. All the Light We Cannot See.
Indeed.
And of course, what made it famous was the fact that it had a blind actress. So everybody's seen it, right? And there's a particular scene in there which had the audio description been sloppy, they would have overlooked something. Now, it's not significant in any formal frame. It's not pivotal. It's not going to make a difference if they put it in or not. But the fact that they put it in meant that the texture of the movie, for me, was even better, or the series. So it was right at the end. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. And so the heroine, Marie-Laure, after the most traumatic experience. Now, this is now the 6th episode, and she's gone through what nobody should go through in a wartime scene in France with bombing, Allied bombing, I might add, which is all true, by the way. So essentially, the story is about a town on the coast of France, and there is now, it is a post D-Day, a D-Day, and so the Allies are now advancing in France, and the town has been locked up by the Germans. They won't let the people leave. And anyway, she goes through bombings, and she, she's surprisingly not killed in this whole incident. Anyway, she finally gets out, and she's going to throw something in the water. But what I loved about it was you suddenly realize that she's barefoot. And you realize this only because the audio describer has taken the trouble to tell you that. And she's run through glass and bomb sites. And so one imagines her feet aren't in great shape. And so she's standing on the beach. And what I loved, what really moved me, was it said, as she's standing at the edge of the water, about to hurl this thing into the sea, is that it said something like, her bloodied and dirty feet on the sand. And then the waves come over and wash over them. But so that image for me was incredibly powerful. So it's on one level, you could say a lazy audio describer would say, oh, for heaven's sakes, do you really need to know? And I would argue, absolutely. Because if you're going to put it in the movie and you're going to see those bloodied and dirty feet, then why shouldn't we know about the bloodied and dirty feet? And what lazy audio describers do is that they overlook certain things where there's an action scene, and it's very difficult. Audio description is not easy. A lot of it's about timing. Well, it's all about timing, exquisitely intricate timing, because you've got a time track. Now, you don't want to interfere. I remember Joel Snyder telling us when the audio description of Star Wars. Now, Star Wars, as you might remember, although you're a bit young to have seen the original, of course, Aaron, but I suspect you might have seen,
Indeed.
maybe
Yeah,
you've seen the latest one.
I've watched through all of them. Yeah, bits and pieces.
Okay,
I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
so you know the music. So everyone knows the music. Music's brilliant, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
um, now the point about that is that George Lucas paid a fortune for that music. So you don't want to mess with the music either. So you've got to time the audio description. One, it mustn't interfere with dialogue. So audio description cannot bump into dialogue. Two, you don't want to take over a classic music scene either, because music, as we know, tells us a great deal in a movie. So it's all about exquisite timing. And there's always gaps. There's gaps between dialogue. There's gaps between action. And so the audio description is extremely difficult. It's not an easy science, which is why it is, in fact, it is recognized as both a science and an art form. And it takes a great deal of skill to write a script with the timing taken into account. So what they do is they look at the track, at the sound track, and they say, right, we've got 3.2 seconds there. That's long. You can say a hell of a lot in 3.2 seconds. But here we've only got half a second. Can we say something in there? Yeah, you can actually say something in half a second. Not a lot, but you can. And so the movie, it's all about looking at the gaps. Now, the audio describer, and this is why a blind person can't do an audio description entirely alone, because you don't know what's happening, but you will certainly have sighted help. But so I'm not suggesting that blind people necessarily need to do audio description. What I am saying, though, is that a blind person should verify or have a role in the editing, so that, one, we choose the right language, so that you don't overuse certain adjectives, certain words, you don't dumb it down too much, and that you don't over doll it up. You don't over glamify the language. This is not an essay. This is not meant to in any way compete with the movie. It has to be quite clinical. You don't add in extra enunciation or emphasis, for instance. You wouldn't, for instance, put an exclamation mark in an audio description script. That's not your job. The movie is there. Your job is to describe what others can. You don't need to describe what's being said. We can hear it. Um, it gets more complicated when there's other language. I remember seeing an audio description of Clint Eastwood's Iwo Jima, and the entire dialogue of Iwo Jima is in Japanese. So you've got the complication of translation, in other words, subtitles. Someone's got to read those subtitles on the audio description, and the actual audio description of what's going on. So then you've got almost a three-dimensional element there. So this is not an easy game. And it's expensive because people cost money. And in what is tragic about this is that, listen, movie making is expensive anyway. And is there sufficient budget to do justice to it in an audio description way? And sadly, clearly not, because I've seen and heard some appalling audio description where whole important things, for instance, race. Is it important to know if the guy's black or white or the woman's black or white? Now, if they've taken the trouble to make it in the movie, why not? But then you get a movie like Bridgerton, a series like Bridgerton, where the Brits are famous for this, where they would almost deliberately confuse people. They confuse people by adding a racial element into what would have definitely been whites only, and they've put they put a black actress where they probably they shouldn't have been. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an artistic
Hmm.
form. It's literally and it's lovely. I love it. I think it's
Sure,
brilliant.
sure.
But is it
Absolutely.
important in the audio
Absolutely.
description sense?
Right. So, to me, the answer is in our final 10 minutes. To me, the answer is it depends on the context of what you're watching, right? It does
Yeah.
depend. Sometimes you do need to say what the person looks like. Sometimes it is okay to say what they look like and what their complexion is or
Mm-hmm.
what color. So sometimes it is okay. It depends upon the context and what it comes down to is how much would the sighted viewer view and value that same information is what it
Yeah.
means to me. How important would that, well, how important that is that to a sighted person, And then I think it's
Mm.
really, really interesting, because any film that I love, and I love many films, but any film that stands out to me always has not necessarily audio description, although when I was a little boy, I watched many films from DVS. Um, but but to make a long story short, anytime that I watch a film with natural narration, as in a film where it's not audio described, but there's still a narrator character that narrates the godlike, the third person, those films always stand out to me. And when that is done well, it completely shifts and completely changes the landscape of the experience when you just have one person sort of acting as the narrator, the god and the godlike narrator in a story. It really paints the picture. And some people who do that have absolutely beautiful voices. The other thing with audio description is you have to have just the right voice. I
Yeah.
do, as you know, I do some volunteer work as a voice actor. And I was talking to someone before I was reading a script just the other day, and I was saying, well, I really want you to choose me and, things like that. And he says, you don't have to ask me to choose you because your voice is the voice I want. It's a very tricky thing. If they want that voice, that's the voice they want. That's a very
Yeah.
tricky
Yeah.
thing. So you
Yeah.
gotta have just the right flavor to the voice. I typically obviously I have a deep and sort of gravelly voice. So I like audio describers who, well, sound like me, who have sort of a deep voice, but also a smooth voice. You also have to have, also to be a podcaster or to be an audio describer, you also have to have incredibly subtle and in-depth control of your breathing and when you breathe and when you pause. And that's just a skill that you have to build. It's very tricky. So yeah. So this Joel Snyder, of course I know of the person. So
Yeah.
how, you obviously know what I'm going to ask. How well do you know the guy?
I knew him well. I haven't come across him. I haven't spoken to him or written to him for a while. Sadly, I didn't, how one does, it lapsed But I
Sure.
used to engage with him a lot because that's how I got those.
I
He sent
mean,
me.
absolutely. I mean,
Why?
do
What
you
are you after?
think, well, do you think you could help me to get in touch with him? Because I think it would be
Sure, sure.
an incredible
Yeah.
accomplishment, an incredible conversation. I think I forget. I mean, I know I've known of the guy over the years. I forget if I've ever reached out to him. Certain people, I feel I just need a little bit more help. And when I see that you're willing to do all this for Aaron's opinion, I want you to be able to help us if you can to provide us. And later
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
catch up
No, I'm
on
pretty
WhatsApp
sure
and
I
talk
can.
about that. But any
Yeah.
help you can get me to successfully put Aaron's opinion in touch with him, that would be really incredible
That
stuff.
would be
All
a
right.
great treat, actually.
So
I mean,
how would you in
yeah.
next 5 to 6 minutes, how would you wrap up this whole beautiful discussion of simply audio description? You know, where do you want to what's some
Okay.
information and knowledge you want the listener to
I
leave
think
with today?
my message is to sighted people who are obviously not necessarily listening entirely, but even to blind people is don't. Well, remember what I said right in the beginning: the things we miss. And I've realized that we miss it. Let me tell you very quickly. I'll tell you in one
Sure.
minute, less than a minute. So that Sea Point Promenade, and I told you about the rhinoceros sculpture that was so clever. Now, I didn't know that existed. It's been there for years, a decade. I didn't know. I didn't know. I'd walked past it for almost 100 times, and no one took the trouble. Even my wife, no one ever said, "Oh wow, what an amazing sculpture!" And it was they mentioned it suddenly in another context. I said, What about it? Tell me about it." "Oh, you're kidding me," I said. So the sighted, even our loved ones, who are lovely with us in terms of describing things, either they grow fatigued or they literally forget. And so I would urge blind people to be curious. And when you hear the slightest thing that might interest you, don't walk past, interrogate. And so to sighted people, I would say, wake up, pay attention to what you're looking at, because it might very well interest your blind friend walking with you. And so don't skimp, don't be stingy with your sort of cornucopia of visual stimulus. Share it through audio. Tell us about what we might be missing.
I could not have asked for a better conclusion. I think that beautifully wraps up both topics today. Absolutely, I got to congratulate you for sticking with me and being willing to put forth as much kindness and effort as you do. You're the personality that I celebrate here at Aaron's Opinion. This is what I want on Aaron's Opinion. So I'm actually I got to be overly direct with you and say, I didn't expect you to be willing to put up with this for nearly 2 hours, but I am forever grateful you did. I could not have asked
Thank
for
you.
a better guest, and I could not have asked for more knowledge. And I'd be curious to see what everybody else around the community says. But this is an absolute highlight here for us. And I just want to say that I wish you the very best of a wonderful, wonderful day in your hotel doing everything else you need to do down there in South Africa. And um, we will certainly catch up on WhatsApp later on today.
Sure,
And please do send me that Joel Snyder recording that you
I
still
will.
have of that painting. And you can certainly WhatsApp that audio to me. We will certainly catch up later. I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to yours. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Now
Great
I
pleasure.
would like to wish you a wonderful day in South Africa. We'll catch up later. As we
Thank
say
you.
here at Aaron's Opinion, see you later, everybody. Keep podcasting and be well. Take care. Help one person today. Help 1 million people tomorrow.